Hello everybody, Dr. Stringer back to talk to you all today about Module 13. It looks like my camera is looking down a little bit for some reason. That's a little bit better. We are on to Module 13 already. We're talking about jail and prison safety and technology. It's not a lot in this module. You probably already did your readings and realized that they were pretty short, only about 4 or 5 pages each. So that's a pretty light week for you all. So with that said, I'm probably not going to have as much to say in my online lecture this week either. But I do hope that you will take this opportunity to start thinking about your research papers, because you really only have we have Module 14 and then Module 15, and those are the last modules of the semester, and then you'll have your exam week, and then your papers will be due. So please take advantage of this additional time that you have. So, as it says here, some of these slides I stole from one of Jim Burns' presentations, as he had some really cool graphics in there that I thought you all might enjoy. And with that said, too, I'm not going to summarize the articles or go into as much of the details of the articles as I usually do. So make sure that you read those. I will pull information from these articles as I talk about these things, but make sure that you go through and read them. So, looking at examples of prison technology in a prison and jail setting, there's very different types of technology. Some of you might have already thought about different types of technology and how they might be used in prisons. And so there's different types of contraband detection devices for finding drugs and weapons, as well as cell phones. And then, we already talked about CCTV, but this is actually a really big thing in prisons. In jails nowadays, they have cameras all over the place to be able to watch and see what people are doing and who is moving through different doors and things like that, as well as perimeter security. And the readings don't really talk about it too much, but for those of you that have never been inside a prison or a jail, most of these doors nowadays are automated. I'm sorry, they're not automated, they're controlled in a way that they're not something that you would just put your key in and open it up. And that is for a very good reason, so that way inmates can't steal the keys from the CO that is nearby and then go and have run amok through the prison or the jail. And most of these things will be controlled through a central control area, central control, whatever you want to call it, a control booth, where people will have to actually push a button to open up doors electronically to let people through. And one of the ways that people are able to see who is at the door to know whether they should open it or not is by using cameras, which will show whether it's a corrections officer at the door or it's an inmate trying to escape. And so there's various different safeguards for that sort of thing. There's also the idea of perimeter security, as you also have cell extraction and less lethal weapons such as tasers that we've already talked about too. So some of this stuff will be a little bit redundant because we've already talked about most of this stuff. And getting towards the end of the semester, we have covered a lot of different types of technology. So one of the things that you look at is concealed weapons and trying to find contraband within prisons and jails. And so there are different types of those. There's concealed weapon and contraband imaging detection devices. And so there's both handheld and walk-through metal detectors. Some of you have probably been through some of these things. If you've been to the airport or you've been to a football game or something like that, you have the one that you walk through, and then a lot of times if you go off on that one, then someone will wand you after you get out to make sure that you don't have anything that you're not supposed to. The big limitation of these is they can't detect non-metallic objects. Those of you that have gone to the airport in more recent years probably have seen these body imaging scanners where you hold your hands up like this and it turns around. And so this kind of helps to build on those limitations of not just being limited to picking up on these metallic items. It can see a whole lot of different things. And so then there's also ion mobility spectrometers, which, these things can identify drugs, but they're much better with cocaine than marijuana. So this is another way that you might try to find things. There's also the backscatter X-ray, which can detect metallic and non-metallic contraband. But then, like some other things like the scanners at the airports, you have this limitation about privacy and exposure to radiation is also another big issue with that. So RFID devices. Some of you might not know what these are, but these are bracelets. And so what they are is they emit this radio frequency, and each one has a specific type of radio frequency, and so they can actually track inmate movement throughout the prison to know that people are in the right place where they're supposed to be. And so of course inmates are required to keep these bracelets on, and usually they're not supposed to be able to get them off, but inmates will find ways, but it is actually an offense for them to take it off, and they'll get thrown in the shoe or the hole, whatever you want to call it, for taking these things off. There's biometric monitoring systems, so hand geometry, fingerprint detection devices to allow access or locations to different locations. These might be more so used with corrections officers, so they can scan their hand, but this technology is a little bit more expensive than having somebody to just look at the camera and see whether it's a corrections officer and let them out. Other things that are happening are smart card systems. You guys are probably familiar with that. Those of you that are, go to campus, I don't know exactly what accesses you all might have on your smart chips and your student IDs, but you've probably seen professors and our IDs will open up classrooms and our offices and different things like that. The outside doors for university buildings, like on the weekends or after hours and things like that. I know some of the dorms have these things, so that if you come into your dorm late at night, the outside door will be locked, but if you have an ID, you can then get into your dorm, which would prevent other people from getting in that aren't supposed to be there. So then there's also the idea of perimeter security. There's been a lot of technological innovations with this over the years, but one of the big things with this is you want to make sure that not only are you keeping the prisoners in the prison, but make sure that you are keeping other people out who might want to get in to try to break people out or things like that. And if you go to many modern prisons that have been built in the past 10 to 20 years, you'll see that the old style of having these big watchtowers and guard towers with the man with the shotgun in it, this is not necessarily the way prisons are anymore. I was just at Leavenworth not too long ago, I think it was last year, and the new prison over there does not look much like a prison. It almost looks almost like a school type of thing. It still had the gates, but the building itself, you didn't have these big walls and things like that, that you might think of when you think about Alcatraz or San Quentin or, these other prisons that were built long ago. And that's because they don't really have a need to have the man up in the gun tower anymore, because of, these advances in technology where now somebody can sit in the central control room and see what's going on throughout the entire prison, including the outside and the perimeter. And so, you might have someone who's patrolling the outside or something like that, just so that way if you see something going on, you can call them on the radio and tell them, what to do and, what's going on and things like that. Other things that have come along, there's a lot more lighting and fencing, electronic detections and contraband detection, things like that. I don't know, some of you might not know the difference, but razor wire is, it's not necessarily a newer, well, I guess it's newer than barbed wire, but razor wire is very effective at keeping people from, trying to climb over it. It does not take a big feat to get over barbed wire. Many of you have probably seen it. It's just kind of strips of wire that have barbs on it. Usually there's like 3 or 4 of them over the top of a fence. And these prisons, they do not incorporate barbed wire. They use what is known as razor wire, which are these huge round wound up bundles of wire with razors on them, which to get caught in would be awful. I think there was a horror movie one time, I want to say it was one of the it was one with the serial killer. Gosh, that's going to drive me crazy. But anyway, and they'd actually thrown somebody or pushed somebody into this big bundle of razor wire anyway. But that's not that important. I want to say it wasn't the 7 Deadly Sins. Anyway, I'll tell you all next week when I remember what the horror movie was. And there was several of them too, and the name of it just escapes me, but that's irrelevant. Perimeter security, this is an important issue. Escapes are actually pretty rare from prisons. What happens most of the times is if someone does successfully escape, it's usually somebody who is off on work release, or some sort of trustee, or someone who was actually taken out of the prison by legitimate means and then somehow managed to escape or walk off from their work release. There have been people that have escaped. It's just very rare, and in modern times it's even rarer. You think about the famous escape from Alcatraz, and if you ever go to Alcatraz, you can see, and they show you the tunnel where they climb down that plumbing wall, and they actually have it opened up where you can see back there, and you can see the hole that they actually managed to make out of the cell into that wall. Is really interesting. So if you ever go to San Francisco, go check that out. It's really cool. But that prison is no longer a prison. It's now a museum, and the technology there is not the same either. And interestingly, when you go in there, they had the cell block, but then they had another area where the guards could walk, but the prisoners couldn't get to, and there was holes every once in a while, and there were gun holes. So the prison guards that were down on the floor with the inmates didn't have guns, but the people that were perched up higher above them could walk up and down the cell block and shoot, if need be, through these gun holes. And there was a story which has escaped me about how someone managed to get up into that gun area where the guard with the gun was and take his gun away. And if you ever go, like I said, if you ever go to Alcatraz, check it out and they'll tell you this story. But anyway, so getting back to technology. So a lot of these things are actually trying to, like I said, keep people out. One of the interesting things that has been a big problem as of late has been the idea of drones, and how people are using drones to fly over the prison walls and then drop cell phones and guns and drugs and different things into the prisons. So that's been a big problem too. But with perimeter issues, they have sensors and things now. They're putting on the fences, motion sensors, and I've even heard of ground sensors to see if there's any kind of tunneling going on underneath of the ground, which is quite interesting in and of itself. And of course, you have video cameras and lighting. I don't think that's anything that's too new, but it is part of the technology that's in prisons and jails nowadays. When I was in Norfolk, there was a story about these people who had somehow managed to escape from, I think it was a tall jail. It was like 6 or 9 stories tall, and they had escaped and somehow gotten out of the window, and the windows from their cell were very, very small. And nowadays, most people would probably not have windows, but this was an older an older jail. Sorry, and they had tied sheets together and managed to get all the way down to the yard. And then I think one of them managed to escape somehow. And so that was an interesting story too. And they didn't use very much technology, just tying some sheets together. And you hear these stories, but this is one where it actually had worked. And a fat guy like me, I would have never gotten through the window to get out, but I probably would have been scared to get out, climb out a window and then climb down some sheets from the 6th floor too. But anyway, so looking at less lethal force, we've already talked about most of these means of less lethal force, but this is something that is oftentimes used in prisons, mainly because corrections officers and jail officers do not carry guns, for the main reason that they do not want the inmates to be able to get control of a gun and then take over the facility. Like I said, with Alcatraz, the people had guns, but they weren't the people that were down there with the inmates. They were up perched above on this, I forget what they called it, a gun walk or something like that, where they could walk up and down, but they were up above where the inmates couldn't get to them. But what you will see sometimes is that prison guards and jail corrections officers might have OC spray or impact munitions, such as maybe a nightstick or a baton. And if they do have guns, they will be probably a beanbag shotgun that shoots beanbags or rubber bullets or something like that to be able to neutralize people. If you ever see the movie The Castle, they had the guys up in the guard towers that had the shotguns with the rubber bullets, and it would be unfortunately sometimes they would shoot people in the head and actually kill them. If you get shot in the head with a rubber bullet, you're not going to be doing so good. Interestingly, as a side note, they say that the rubber bullets actually hurt more than the real bullets do because they hit more tissue. A regular bullet just goes through you, but they hit more tissue with the rubber ones. But then again, getting shot with a shotgun either way is not going to be having a very good day. Not as much is very known about less lethal force in prisons. We tend to not really know a lot about what goes on in prisons, with the exception of some states like Pennsylvania that have a Pennsylvania Prison Society, which can go in and monitor them. Most prisons don't like criminologists and other people to go and see what's going on there. So we don't have as much information about that as we would like. So, cell phones in prisons, that's another thing. And so cell phones are a part of technology, and so inmates are using them in the prisons. So why did prisoners need cell phones? Well, they use it to facilitate the commission of crimes, to help plan escapes, to tell friends on the outside, to retaliate against witnesses who plan to testify at trial, and they might call home to mom or things like that too. And so there is a way, which is not necessarily a technology, but it is a way of finding drugs, and they actually use dogs. Dogs can smell cell phones just like they smell drugs and other contraband. So dogs have been used, mostly Labradors, to find phones in places such as shoes and electrical outlets and hidden in plumbing and toilets, where corrections officers might not be able to find them. So that's been a very useful tool for corrections. Looking at the next couple of things, counterfeiting and contraband, cell phone use in prisons, technological explanation. This is what I was talking about with Jim Burns' slides here. And so this is some of the technology that Jim Byrne has brought in his article that I wanted to share with you. The sniffer. They have these things called electronic sniffers that emit this low power radio signal that detects reflects off of nearby electronics. It has to be close to the cell phone, but the big thing that's cool with this is it detects the cell phone whether they're on or off. And it doesn't depend on what frequency the cell phone's on. So inmates, if they're not using their cell phone and they know that you have some sort of means of one of these other methods that we'll talk about, they might just keep their cell phone off all the time. Plus, they don't want to run the risk of it ringing while there's a CO in their cell searching for contraband. So it might oftentimes be off. But these detectors are actually able to detect them even when they're not on, which is a cool piece of technology. And then there's these passive detection devices. And so to look at this, it only detects the cell phone when it's active. Calls can still be connected. There's a network of sensors. So you might have sensors along the different parts of the wall, as we see here in this illustration, and then it can kind of triangulate it and tell where it is, and when it might go off if an inmate goes near it. So there's also handheld detectors where officers, corrections officers, can go, and it's kind of like a wand to sniff these things out, so to speak. No pun intended. And then there's jamming devices. And so what you can actually do, and some of you might be familiar with radio jamming, radio frequency jamming, is to prevent the radio frequencies from being able to reach the tower. So if you try to make a cell phone call and your jamming is activated within the prison or the jail that you're in, it's not going to work. It's not going to connect. You'll have no service. The big problem with these is they are not able to discriminate between different cell phones. So if the warden wants to make a call, it's not going to let him do it either, just the same as the inmate who wants to call and put out a hit on a witness. So they don't really discriminate between who's trying to make the call. They just don't let anyone make the call, which can be a little bit more problematic. So there are a little bit better things than to jam calls, is an inmate call capture technology, which is effectively a miniature cell phone site. And so what happens is then impermissible calls will be blocked and won't be able to connect to the cell phone tower. But then permissible calls, such as calls from the warden and things like that, will be permitted to go on through to the cell phone tower. And so this kind of builds on the limitations of jamming, so it prevents the inmates from calling people, but it allows everyone else to. And so that is a little bit better, right? And so that is the last of that. And so that is all I have to say with you all for this week. So I will say that I hope you all have a good week, and please don't forget to go and start working on your research papers if you give a chance, because they are due in just a few weeks. And so please email me if you have any issues, and I look forward to talking to you next week, and I'll try to remember the name of that movie that I couldn't remember. But with that, everybody have a good day, and we'll talk to you next week.